Now we head over to South Africa where it's back to school for thousands of school children who have been out of school for the last 26 months. Schooling in South Africa, well, like anywhere else in the world, has been heavily disrupted by COVID pandemic, while some schools managed to introduce online and digital learning platforms for students. But South Africa's Department of Basic Education has estimated that learners in disadvantaged communities lost a year's worth of learning in 2020 due to a lack of teaching contact time.
Well, as the new school year gets underway today, we take a look at the schooling in South Africa and what's in store for all these learners. Joining us this morning on Breakfast Central is Dr. Vijay Reddy from the Inclusive Economic Development Research Program at the Human Science Research Council in South Africa. Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for being here on Breakfast Central. As these students start the school year, give us a picture on how education has been affected by the pandemic in South Africa.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to Central News for inviting me to share the South African experience of this global phenomena. As you've already said, schooling has been disrupted since 2020, March 2020, like all other countries. And during the period from 2020, 2021, we have been through complete lockdowns and therefore complete school closures, to then a form of rotational learning where due to the requirements to mitigate against COVID-19, physical distancing was very important. Right. And so learners had to then go to school maybe twice a week or thrice a week, and so as you've indicated at the beginning, during this time, during each of the years, the majority of learners lost about 60% of contact time and schooling. Now, one other point to add about the South African education system, as you well know, it's a very fragile system and it's building up, and through the years, it has improved its outcomes. But the other aspect of it is that it is unequal and socially graded, which means that for 30% of the learners or students who come from better resourced and economically advantaged homes and go to better resourced schools, they've been able to continue learning fairly uninterrupted through the digital platforms. But for 70% of the learners who come from poorer households, who have go to less resource schools and have less better instruction, despite the best intentions of the state, the schools, the teachers, we can say that very little learning took place. So again, COVID has amplified and widened inequalities, and in this case, educational inequalities have been widened, with the poorer learners being worst affected by it.
All right, Doctor. Now, clearly you have come out to tell us the statistics in terms of percentage. 70% of the learners were at disadvantaged position because of the economy of the country. Now, will schooling be affected differently this year, or are these children going into the same scenarios as last year?
Well, this is my view. I mean, the minister will pronounce on what will happen in schools. But I think in terms of the input that I would make is that in 2022, we'll have to look at how we live with the virus differently than we did in 2020. We know that the COVID virus will be around for a while, and all countries and in all sectors, we have to find ways to mitigate against this virus and to live with it. We cannot stop our lives completely for another year. In our analysis, we find that if we look at the implications of all the school closures for the 2 years, that the learning losses experienced by learners, especially the poor, far outweighs the risks that are posed by COVID-19 now in 2022. And so while the approach for the last 2 years has been largely physical distancing and hence fewer learners in a classroom, etc. The approach now is to think about how we live with this virus by using a basket of interventions. We have vaccinations. And while we still need to go away, we're about 45% of the adult population vaccinated, and we still have a way to go, but vaccinations is an important part. By the way, teachers were prioritized in the vaccination campaign, and most teachers are vaccinated. In addition, the vaccinations have been opened up for children from 12 to 17 years as well. So vaccination is a big part of our lives now. Secondly, the use of, sorry?
Go ahead.
The second intervention that's very important is how we use face masks. And literature has shown that the face masks are very effective in terms of mitigating the spread of the virus. Thirdly, ventilation. And so open spaces, open windows, these are very important. Fourthly, it is the hand washing. Still basic as though it sounds, it's still a very important mitigating factor against contracting the coronavirus. And fifthly, it's the physical distancing. And I think when we started in 2020, the World Health Organization has said it must be 2 meters apart, and it decreased to 1.5 meters. And now WHO says we should be 1 meter apart. But we also have far more research now on the effects of distancing and looking at the literature again, and there isn't definitive evidence that schools with slightly less than 1 meter will be higher transmission rates and higher infection rates than the communities in which it is surrounded. So I think that in 2022, all of us need to think about the virus differently. And I know that the state and government is looking at ways of bringing all children back to school safely. It has the support of the unions, and parents are very keen for children to get back to school. So there is widespread support. And I think what everybody would just need is the reassurance that the safety of children and teachers in schools when they return fully. So our hope is that 2022 will see a return to normality in the schooling system.
All right. Before we let you go, very, very briefly, Dr. Vijay, how has the government compensated the learners over the last 26 months? Have they been compensated, if at all? And should they be doing anything differently?
Well, again, like all governments around the world, this was a challenge. And as I said, for the more affluent learners, there was online learning and they were okay. The state has tried to firstly streamline the curriculum in that they chose which are the certain parts of the curriculum that could be ignored for that year. And this was one way to try to reduce the curriculum load in learning. They did try to have some radio and television programs, but I don't think that was enough. And it could have been a very effective, could have been a far more effective way to reach the vulnerable, the poorer learners, etc. I think going forward again, as we look through the evidence around the world, we know that for learners, the younger learners, I think we should just focus on 3 things. We should focus on language development and reading for meaning. Secondly, we should focus on children writing simple sentences. And thirdly, introducing some very basic computational skills, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And if we can give our children the good foundational skills on these matters, it's easier to catch up later. But the critical part is a very good foundational base for reading, writing, and numeracy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vijay, for joining us this morning. Quite an apt and interesting way to know that as schools resume today, of course, everyone is ready from the top of their mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much.